The polished marble floor felt cold, even through the soles of his worn work boots, a stark contrast to the warmth of his daughter's small hand, tucked securely in his. Liam adjusted the collar on his best flannel shirt, the one with the patch on the elbow he'd sewn himself, and took a deep breath. The air in the lobby of Sterling Industries was different. It smelled like money and filtered air, a world away from the familiar scent of sawdust and machine oil that clung to his clothes like a second skin. Beside him, Maya, all of 8 years old, with wide, curious eyes and a bright pink bow in her hair, squeezed his hand. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of awe and a child's unwavering trust. It was Family Day. At the plant, a once-a-year event meant to boost morale, a transparent corporate gesture that felt more like a requirement than a celebration. But Maya had been looking forward to it for weeks, excited to see the big machines her dad talked about, the place where he spent most of his waking hours. For her, this was an adventure. For Liam, it was a tightrope, walk over a pit of anxiety. The plant had been struggling for months, whispers of buyouts and layoffs slithering through the break room like smoke. He'd been with Sterling for 12 years, since he was barely out of his teens, working his way up from sweeping floors to being one of the most reliable foremen on the line. He knew every machine by its groan, every process by its rhythm. This place wasn't just a job. It was the steady ground beneath his feet, the only thing that had kept him and Maya afloat since her mother had passed 3 years ago. The thought of it disappearing was a cold knot in his stomach that no amount of forced corporate cheer could loosen. They walked past a massive, abstract metal sculpture that probably cost more than his car and approached the check-in table. The woman behind it offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she handed them name tags. Liam, his read. Maya, hers announced in a cheerful, bubbly font. As he peeled the back off his tag, he noticed a woman standing near the elevators. She wasn't dressed like the other executives in their sharp, severe suits. Her clothes were simple, elegant, a dark gray wool coat, tailored trousers, and soft leather boots. She held no clipboard, no phone, just stood with a quiet, observant stillness, her gaze sweeping over the families trickling in. There was a loneliness in her posture that felt out of place amidst the forced festivity. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he saw a flicker of something he couldn't name. No pity, not judgment, but a deep, unreadable weariness. He looked away quickly, focusing on affixing Maya's name tag perfectly straight on her little jacket. He didn't belong in a world of quiet observers and expensive coats. He belonged on the factory floor, where work was honest and your value was measured in what you could build, not who you knew. The tour began, a loud, chaotic procession through the sprawling facility. Liam pointed out the different stations to Maya, explaining how sheets of raw steel were pressed, cut, and assembled into parts for everything from cars to appliances. She was fascinated, her small face lit with wonder at the sheer scale of it all. Liam felt a swell of pride, a brief respite from the gnawing worry. This was his world, and for a moment, seeing it through her eyes, it felt important. They stopped near the main assembly line, where a new automated system was being integrated. It was the source of most of the plant's recent problems, glitchy, inefficient, and constantly breaking down. Mr. Jennings, the plant manager, a man whose ambition was as sharp and cold as his starched white collar, was leading the tour group. He spoke in clipped, corporate-approved phrases, glossing over the new system's failures. This state-of-the-art upgrade represents Sterling's commitment to a streamlined, profitable future, he announced, gesturing with a dismissive wave. As he spoke, a loud clank echoed from the machine, followed by a high-pitched whine. The conveyor belt shuddered to a halt. Jennings' jaw tightened. He barked into his radio, his voice laced with irritation. Liam saw the problem instantly. Sensor misalignment. A simple fix he'd flagged weeks ago, but was told was not in the budget to address. He watched as 2 younger technicians struggled with the control panel, their faces etched with panic. Without thinking, Liam handed his half-eaten pretzel to Maya. "Hold this for a sec, sweetie. Daddy's just got to check something." He stepped past the velvet rope, his boots sure on the grated floor. He didn't ask for permission. He just saw something broken and knew how to fix it. He spent less than 2 minutes at the control panel, bypassing the faulty sensor and manually resetting the pressure valve. The machine hummed back to life, the conveyor belt resuming its steady, rhythmic journey. A few of the other workers, men he'd known for years, gave him grateful nods. Jennings, however, turned to him, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Liam?" His voice cut through the noise of the factory. "That is a restricted area. You are not authorized to touch that equipment." "It was a simple fix, Mr. Jennings," Liam said calmly, stepping back behind the rope. "The line was down. I got it running again." "You jeopardized the safety protocols. You undermined my authority." Jennings' voice rose, drawing the attention of the entire tour group. Maya watched, her smile gone, her hand clutching the pretzel so tightly it crumbled. The quiet woman in the gray coat had moved closer, her expression still unreadable, but her focus was now fixed entirely on the unfolding scene. "This is exactly the kind of reckless, insubordinate behavior this new ownership will not tolerate," Jennings spat, his eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of triumph. He seemed to be performing for someone. Liam's stomach dropped. "In fact," Jennings continued, his voice resonating with theatrical finality, "consider this your official notice. You're fired. Get your personal effects and escort yourself off the property." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The hum of the machinery seemed to fade, replaced by a deafening, ringing silence. Fired. In front of everyone. In front of his daughter. Liam's mind went blank. The world narrowed to the shocked faces of his coworkers, the smug satisfaction on Jennings' face, and the small, trembling hand that slipped into his. Maya looked up at him, her eyes welling with tears she was trying desperately to hold back. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost in the sudden, heavy silence of the factory floor. "Did we do something wrong?" That single question shattered the numb disbelief and pierced straight through Liam's chest, a pain sharper and more profound than any public humiliation. He crouched down, turning his back to the staring crowd, to Jennings, to all of it, and focused only on her. He forced a smile, though it felt like his face might crack. "No, sweetheart. No. You did everything perfect. We're going to go on a different adventure now." His voice was a raw, strained whisper. He could feel the eyes on his back, a mixture of pity, discomfort, and in some cases, a carefully concealed relief that it wasn't them. The solidarity of the factory floor had its limits, especially when jobs were on the line. He scooped Maya up into his arms, her small body trembling against his. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair for a second, trying to shield her from the shame that was burning him from the inside out. He had failed her. He had brought her here to show her his world, a world of strength and creation, and instead he had shown her his defeat. He stood up, turning to leave, his pride a tattered flag in a storm. He wouldn't beg. He wouldn't argue. He would just walk away with what little dignity he had left. As he turned, he saw her again, the woman in the gray coat. She was no longer standing at a distance. She was right there, just a few feet away, and her eyes were no longer unreadable. They were filled with a cold, quiet anger that seemed directed not at him, but squarely at the man who had just dismantled his life. She held his gaze for a long, loaded moment. It wasn't a look of sympathy, it was a look of assessment, of something being weighed and measured. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, so small he almost thought he imagined it, she shifted her gaze back to Jennings, who was now preening like a rooster who had just won a fight. Liam didn't know who she was, but in that fleeting moment he felt like he wasn't the only one who had seen the injustice. He didn't have time to dwell on it. His only priority was getting Maya out of there, away from the stares and the whispers, away from the place that had been his second home and was now just a monument to his failure. He walked toward the exit, his boots echoing on the concrete, each step feeling heavier than the last. The sounds of the factory started to hum back to life behind them, a world moving on without him. Maya had her face buried in his shoulder, her quiet sobs muffled against his shirt. He didn't know what he was going to do tomorrow or the day after that. All he knew was that the steady ground he had stood on for 12 years had just crumbled into dust beneath his feet. The walk back to the parking lot felt 100 miles long. The crisp autumn air, which had felt invigorating that morning, now felt thin and cold. Liam fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the door to his beat-up sedan. He gently buckled Maya into her car seat, wiping the tear tracks from her cheeks with his thumb. "It's okay, sweetie," he whispered, his own voice thick with unshed emotion. "We're okay." She didn't answer, just clutched the stuffed unicorn. She kept in the car, her eyes wide and lost. He got into the driver's seat and just sat there for a moment, the keys dangling from the ignition, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The sheer, overwhelming weight of it all pressed down on him. The rent was due next week. The car needed new brakes. Maya's winter coat was a size too small. Fired. The word echoed in the silence of the car, ugly and final. He was a good worker. He was reliable. He cared. None of it had mattered. He had been made an example of, a pawn in some corporate power play he didn't understand. He finally turned the key, and the engine coughed to life with a reluctant groan, a sound that felt painfully appropriate. As he pulled out of the parking spot, his eyes drifted to the main entrance of the building. Mr. Jennings was standing on the steps, talking animatedly to the woman in the gray coat. Jennings was gesturing, smiling, his body language a cringeworthy display of deference. The woman, however, stood perfectly still, her hands in her coat pockets, her expression unreadable from this distance. She didn't seem to be responding, just listening. Or maybe, Liam thought, she was judging. Then, as if she could feel his gaze, she turned her head and looked directly at his car. Their eyes met again, across the expanse of the parking lot. This time, there was no nod, no flicker of emotion. Just a long, steady look that held him in place for a heartbeat. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know who she was. He just knew that her image, the quiet stillness, the coat, the unnerving focus in her eyes was seared into his memory, another confusing fragment in the wreckage of his day. He tore his gaze away, pressing his foot on the gas, and drove away from Sterling Industries without looking back, the factory shrinking in his rearview mirror until it was just another building against a cold, unforgiving sky. He had no plan, no prospects, and a daughter in the back seat who had just seen her father at his lowest. The adventure was over. The free fall had just begun. The apartment was quiet when they got home, the kind of quiet that felt heavy and suffocating. Liam went through the motions, making Maya her favorite lunch of grilled cheese and tomato soup, cutting the crusts off just the way she liked. She ate without her usual chatter, her eyes fixed on the cartoon playing on the small television in the corner. Each bite she took felt like a victory to him, a small act of normalcy in a day that was anything but. After lunch, he tucked her into bed for a nap, an old ritual from when she was younger that she'd mostly outgrown, but today she didn't protest. She just curled up under the worn quilt, her stuffed unicorn clutched tight, and closed her eyes. Liam watched her for a moment, his heart a dull, heavy ache in his chest. She was the reason he worked so hard, the reason he put up with the long hours and the thankless tasks. And now he had no work to go to. He walked into the small kitchen and sank into one of the rickety chairs at the table, running a hand over his face. The reality was beginning to set in, sharp and cold. He pulled out a pen and a notepad, the one he used for grocery lists and budget calculations, and started to write down numbers. Savings. Minimal. Last paycheck. Already mentally spent on rent and utilities. The math was bleak. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his composure. He had to do something. Anything. He spent the next hour online, scrolling through job listings on his phone, the screen a glaring blue light in the dim room. Warehouse work, delivery driver, overnight stalker. Most paid less than he was making. Many required a clean background check, which he had. but also a kind of desperate flexibility he wasn't sure he could manage as a single parent. The world felt like it was closing in, the walls of his small apartment feeling tighter with every passing minute. He was so lost in the spiral of worry that he didn't hear the knock at first. It was soft, hesitant. He ignored it, assuming it was a package for a neighbor. But it came again, a little firmer this time. With a sigh, he pushed himself up from the table and walked to the door, expecting to see a delivery person or a proselytizer. When he opened it, he froze. Standing in the hallway of his modest apartment building, looking completely and utterly out of place, was the woman in the gray coat. Her expression was calm, her posture poised, but her eyes held a trace of uncertainty. "Mr. Liam?" she asked, her voice as quiet and steady as he remembered. "My name is Isabella Vance. I was hoping we could talk." The sight of her standing there, on his worn welcome mat, was so surreal that Liam couldn't process it at first. Isabella Vance. The name meant nothing to him, but her presence was a jolt to his system. He just stared, his mind struggling to connect the dots. The woman from the factory, the one who had watched him get fired, was at his door. "How did you find me?" he asked, his voice rough. It was the only question his brain could form. She didn't flinch at his tone. "Your address is in your employee file. I apologize for the intrusion, but this couldn't wait." Her apology sounded sincere, but it did little to ease the confusion and suspicion churning in his gut. What did she want? Was she here on behalf of Jennings to deliver some final, formal paperwork, to make sure he wouldn't sue? He felt a protective instinct rise in him, a sudden urge to shield his home, his life, from whatever she represented. Maya was still sleeping in the other room, and the last thing he wanted was to bring the mess from the factory into this small sanctuary. "Look, if this is about what happened today," he started, his hand tightening on the doorknob, "I don't have anything to say. It's done." "It's not done," she said, her gaze unwavering. "That's why I'm here. May I come in? I promise I won't take much of your time." There was a plea in her voice, subtle but present. It wasn't the voice of an executive or a corporate stooge. It was the voice of someone who genuinely wanted to be heard. Against his better judgment, against every instinct telling him to close the door and lock it, he found himself stepping aside. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the flicker of something that looked like empathy in her eyes. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a desperate, foolish sliver of hope that this wasn't the end of the story. He led her into the small living room. The space was tidy but worn. The couch had a faint tear in the arm, covered by a neatly folded blanket. The bookshelf was filled with Maya's picture books and a few of his own dog-eared paperbacks. It was a room that spoke of a life lived on a budget, but also a life filled with love. Isabella, he tried the name out in his head, didn't look around with judgment or pity. She simply took it all in, her quiet, observant nature on full display. She stood in the center of the room, her elegant coat, a stark contrast to the lived-in comfort of his home. She hadn't taken it off, as if she knew she wouldn't be staying long. "Mr. Jennings overstepped his authority today," she began, getting straight to the point. "What he did was unprofessional and unwarranted." Liam crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen. A wall of skepticism was already building inside him. "He's the plant manager. Firing people is part of his job description, isn't it?" "Not like that," she said firmly. "And not you. I saw what you did. You prevented a costly shutdown and a potential safety hazard. You should have been commended, not dismissed." The words were what he'd been telling himself all afternoon, but hearing them from her, a stranger who had been a silent witness, felt strangely validating. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this. "So, what are you?" he asked bluntly. "Human resources, an auditor? Here to offer me a severance package so I don't make a fuss?" A small, wry smile touched her lips, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Nothing like that. I'm an interested party. The company is undergoing a significant transition. The old way of doing things, the culture that someone like Jennings represents, is precisely what needs to change. She paused, her eyes searching his, as if trying to gauge if he was ready for what she was about to say next. "The truth is, Liam, I call you Liam? I came here to offer you your job back." The offer hung in the air between them, shimmering with possibility and fraught with suspicion. His job back. It was the one thing he wanted, the one thing he needed. And yet, coming from her, it felt complicated, tangled in questions he didn't have the answers to. Why her? Who was she to make such an offer? He stared at her, his mind racing. Was this a test? A trick? He'd seen enough corporate maneuvering to know that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice low and steady. "You're not just an interested party. People who are just interested don't show up at a fired foreman's apartment to rehire him." Isabella took a slow breath. As if bracing herself, she finally unbuttoned her coat, revealing a simple but exquisitely made silk blouse underneath. The gesture felt symbolic, a small shedding of her armor. "You're right," she said. "The company was recently acquired. The new owner prefers to remain anonymous for now, but I've been brought in to oversee the transition, to assess the assets, both mechanical and human." She was choosing her words carefully, a polished corporate speech that still felt like it was hiding something. "I've been observing the plant for 2 weeks. I've seen the inefficiency, the low morale, and I've seen you. I saw you. Help the new kid, Marco, when his machine jammed last week, even though it wasn't your station. I saw you stay late on your own time to recalibrate the loaders on line 3. And I saw you today." Liam's skepticism didn't waver, but a sliver of something else, curiosity, pushed through. She had been watching. She had noticed. "So you're a consultant?" he pressed. "Something like that," she conceded, the vagueness returning. "My role is to report my findings directly to the new ownership. And my primary finding is that the plant's most valuable asset is its people like you. And its biggest liability is management that leads through fear like Mr. Lairs." Jennings. The way she said Jennings' name was laced with an ice that made Liam certain the manager's days were numbered. That, at least, brought a grim satisfaction. "I want you to come back, Liam," she repeated, her voice softer now, more direct. "Not just as a foreman. I want you to head the operational efficiency team. Your practical knowledge is worth more than any degree. You know what's broken, and you know how to fix it. I want to give you the authority to do just that. Head of a team. Authority. A real title." It was more than he could have dreamed of. It was a lifeline, a rescue raft in the middle of the ocean he was drowning in. But his pride, the same stubborn pride that had kept him from begging for his job, was a powerful current. "Why?" he asked, the word laced with years of learned distrust. "Why me? This feels like charity." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Isabella's expression hardened, not with anger, but with something that looked like disappointment. "This isn't charity, Liam. This is a strategic business decision. I don't invest in charity, I invest in competence. And from what I've seen, you are the most competent person in that entire building." She took a step closer, her gaze intense. "I'm not asking you to take a handout. I'm asking you to help me save that plant. To help me build something better for everyone who works there. But I can't do it without people on the inside who I can trust. People who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty." Her words chipped away at the wall he had built. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering respect. She was offering a partnership of sorts. He looked past her, through the doorway to Maya's room, where his daughter was sleeping, blissfully unaware of the monumental decision being weighed in the next room. This wasn't just about his pride. It was about her future. He let out a long, slow breath, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary, cautious acceptance. "When would I start?" he asked. Isabella's shoulders relaxed, a subtle but definite release of tension. A genuine smile, the first one he'd seen from her, lit up her face, transforming her from a poised executive into someone warm, someone human. "Tomorrow morning," she said. And Mr. Jennings will be the one escorting himself off the property. Liam couldn't help the small, humorless laugh that escaped him. He ran a hand through his hair, the sheer whiplash of the day finally catching up to him. Fired and rehired in the span of a few hours. It was insane. "Okay," he said, the word feeling both like a surrender and a new beginning. "Okay, I'll do it." He didn't know then that saying yes to Isabella Vance was about to change more than just his job. He was stepping into her world, a world of secrets and power he couldn't yet imagine, and nothing in his life would ever be the same again. After Isabella left, leaving behind a crisp business card with a private number and an air of quiet authority, Liam sank back into his kitchen chair, his head spinning. He felt like he'd just survived a hurricane. He replayed the conversation in his mind, dissecting every word, every glance. A consultant for the new owner. It made sense, and yet it didn't. There was a confidence to her, an effortless command, that went beyond the role of an advisor. She spoke of investing and assets with the ease of someone who signed the checks, not just someone who made recommendations. He pushed the thought aside. He couldn't afford to look a gift horse in the mouth. He had a job, a better job. That was all that mattered. The rest was just noise. When Maya woke up from her nap, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she padded into the kitchen and saw him sitting at the table, staring into space. "Are you sad, Daddy?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. He looked up and pulled her into his lap, hugging her tightly. "No, sweetie, not anymore. Actually, I think our adventure just got a lot more interesting." He explained it to her in simple terms that the nice lady from the factory had fixed the misunderstanding, that Daddy had a new job where he got to be the boss of fixing things. Maya's face lit up, her earlier fear replaced with a bright, uncomplicated joy. "Does that mean we can get pizza tonight?" she asked, her priorities perfectly in order. Liam laughed, a real, genuine laugh that seemed to chase the last of the day's shadows from the small apartment. "Yes," he said, "it absolutely means we can get pizza." That evening, as they sat on the floor eating pepperoni pizza from a cardboard box, Liam felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The constant, low-grade hum of financial anxiety had quieted, replaced by a fragile but persistent sense of hope. He had a chance. They had a chance. He still had the business card in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at it again. Isabella Vance. The name was printed in simple, elegant font on thick, cream-colored stock. There was no company logo, no title. Just the name and a number. It was minimalist, confident, and deeply mysterious. Just like the woman herself. He didn't know what he was getting into, not really. But as he watched his daughter happily munch on a pizza crust, her face smeared with sauce, he knew he'd made the right choice. For the first time in a long, long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The next morning, Liam walked through the gates of Sterling Industries with a feeling he couldn't quite name. It was a strange cocktail of trepidation, vindication, and sheer disbelief. He was wearing the same worn boots, the same faded jeans, but he was no longer just a foreman. He was, as Isabella had put it, the head of the operational efficiency team. The title felt foreign, like a suit that didn't quite fit. The security guard at the gate, a man who had averted his eyes in pity yesterday, now gave him a nod of confused respect. Word, it seemed, had already started to travel. As he crossed the parking lot, he saw Mr. Jennings being escorted from the building by two security guards, a cardboard box of personal items clutched in his arms. Jennings' face was a mask of indignant rage. Their eyes met for a brief, satisfying moment. Liam didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the turn of the tide, and kept walking. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. People were gathered in small groups, whispering, glancing his way. He could feel the questions, the speculation. He headed straight for the small windowless office he'd been assigned, a space previously used for storing old files. It wasn't much, but it was his. He had just set down his lunchbox when Isabella appeared in the doorway. Today, she wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked every bit the powerful consultant, yet there was a softness in her eyes when she looked at him. "Good morning, Liam," she said. "Ready to get to work?" "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, still feeling like he was in a dream. "Where do we start?" "We start with a tour," she said. "But this time, you're the one leading it. I want you to walk me through this entire plant, from receiving to shipping, and tell me everything that's wrong with it. No filters, no corporate jargon. Just the truth." For the next several hours, they did just that. Liam, in his element, pointed out the systemic flaws he'd been complaining about for years: the outdated inventory system, the inefficient workflow on the packing line, the chronic lack of preventative maintenance on the older machinery. He spoke with a passion and clarity that came from years of hands-on experience. Isabella listened intently, taking notes on a sleek silver tablet. She didn't interrupt, didn't question his assessments. She just absorbed it all, her perceptive gaze missing nothing. She saw not just the broken machines, but the weary resignation on the workers' faces. She saw the makeshift repairs held together with duct tape and hope. She saw the deep, ingrained problems that went far beyond what any spreadsheet could show. They stopped for a moment near a massive hydraulic press, its rhythmic thumping a steady heartbeat in the cavernous space. "Jennings was cutting corners on maintenance to make his quarterly numbers look better, wasn't he?" she asked, not looking at him, but at the machine. "He was running this place into the ground," Liam confirmed. "He cared more about his bonus than about the people working here or the future of this plant." "That's going to change," Isabella said, her voice quiet but firm. "The new owner is prepared to make a significant capital investment. New equipment, better training, and a complete overhaul of the management structure." Liam looked at her, a question burning on his tongue. "This new owner, they must be serious. Who is it?" Isabella finally turned to him, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "Let's just say they have a vested interest in seeing things run properly. They believe in building things that last." There was that phrase again, building things that last. It was more than just a corporate slogan. Coming from her, it sounded like a personal philosophy. He was beginning to realize that Isabella Vance was a puzzle, and he was only just starting to see the edges of the pieces. And for some reason he couldn't explain, he found himself wanting to see the whole picture. The first week was a whirlwind. Liam spent his days on the factory floor, talking to the workers, cataloging problems, and drawing up a list of priority fixes. For the first time, people listened. His suggestions weren't dismissed as complaints, they were logged as action items. The change in atmosphere was palpable. The fear that had permeated the plant under Jennings' rule began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious, fragile optimism. Isabella was a constant, quiet presence. She wasn't a micromanager. She gave Liam the space to work, but she was always there, observing, asking sharp, insightful questions. They fell into an easy rhythm, a professional partnership that felt surprisingly natural. They'd often eat lunch together in the noisy cafeteria, sitting at a formica table amidst the clatter of trays and conversation. She never seemed to mind the lack of amenities, the burnt coffee, or the gossip that inevitably followed them. She'd listen as Liam talked about his ideas for the plant, and in turn, she'd share vague but intriguing stories about other companies she had worked with, other problems she had solved. But she never talked about herself. Her personal life was a closed book. Liam learned that she liked her coffee black, that she had a surprising knowledge of 20th century literature, and that she had a soft spot for the stray cat that hung around the loading docks. But he didn't know where she was from, if she had a family, or what she did when she wasn't at the plant. She was an enigma, wrapped in elegant coats and quiet confidence. One afternoon, he was working late, trying to untangle a particularly messy supply chain issue, when Maya called. Her voice was small and sad over the phone. Her school's fall festival had been scheduled for that evening, and he'd promised to take her. In the chaos of the new job, he had completely forgotten. His heart sank. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," he said, the guilt a heavy weight in his chest. "I'll be there as soon as I can." He was about to hang up and race out the door when Isabella, who had been working in the adjoining office, appeared in the doorway. She must have overheard. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "I forgot about Maya's school festival," he admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm a terrible father." "You're not a terrible father," she said gently. "You're a man who's been given a mountain to climb. Go, this can wait until tomorrow." "I can't just leave," he protested. "This report is due." "I'll finish it," she said, without a hint of hesitation. He stared at her, stunned. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I want to. Now go be a dad. That's the most important job you have." He hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over him. "Thank you, Isabella." "It's what partners do," she replied, her eyes soft. As he rushed out, he couldn't shake the feeling that her kindness went beyond professional courtesy. She was a fortress of secrets, but every now and then he caught a glimpse of the person inside, and he found himself wanting to know her more. He didn't know that after he left, Isabella stayed for hours, not just finishing his report, but rereading every note he'd made, every observation. She wasn't just impressed by his competence, she was moved by his integrity. In a world of men who postured and promised, Liam simply did. He was real, in a way that no one in her life had ever been. And that, she was beginning to realize, was becoming dangerously appealing. The fall festival was a chaotic explosion of color and sound. The school gymnasium smelled like popcorn, wet leaves, and elementary school excitement. Booths lined the walls, offering everything from face painting to a cakewalk. Liam arrived, breathless and flustered, to find Maya sitting on a hay bale near the pumpkin carving station, her face a mask of disappointment. When she saw him, her expression lifted, but the hurt still lingered in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," he said, crouching in front of her. "Daddy got so busy, I lost track of time." "It's okay," she mumbled, though her quivering lip told a different story. He pulled her into a hug, feeling the familiar pang of parental guilt. He was trying so hard to build a better future for her that he was missing the present. He spent the rest of the evening making it up to her. They played ring toss, decorated cookies with far too much frosting, and got their faces painted, he, a reluctant tiger, she, a proud butterfly. By the time they left, Maya's disappointment had been replaced by a sleepy, sugar-fueled happiness. On the drive home, she was quiet for a long time before she spoke. "That lady from your work, Isabella," she said. "Is she your new boss?" "Sort of," Liam replied, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "We work together." "She's nice," Maya said. "But she looks sad, even when she smiles." The observation, so simple and yet so astute, hit Liam with surprising force. He'd seen it too, that shadow of melancholy that clung to Isabella, even in her most professional moments. He had chalked it up to stress, to the pressure of her job. But maybe it was something deeper. The next day at the plant, he saw her through new eyes. He noticed the way she'd sometimes stare out the window of her office, her gaze distant and unfocused. He noticed the slight, almost imperceptible hesitation before she'd join a group for lunch, as if she were bracing herself for a social interaction she'd rather avoid. He found himself wanting to ask, to break through the polished exterior and find out what was really going on behind those perceptive, guarded eyes. His chance came a few days later. They were in the middle of a heated debate over a new inventory software system. The vendor was pushing a top-of-the-line package that was expensive and overly complicated. Liam argued for a simpler, more practical solution. The argument was going in circles, with Isabella playing devil's advocate, challenging his assumptions. The more expensive system has better analytics, better long-term scalability, she argued, tapping her pen on her notepad. The cheaper one is a band-aid, not a solution. It's a practical fix for a practical problem, Liam countered, his frustration growing. We don't need a spaceship to haul groceries, we need a reliable truck. The tension in the room was thick. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling, Look, Isabella, I know you're used to a world where the best option is always the most expensive one, but in my world, the best option is the one that works, the one that doesn't break the bank, and the one that my guys can actually learn to use without a 3-week training seminar." His words were sharper than he intended, and he immediately regretted them. But Isabella didn't get defensive. Instead, a strange, sad smile touched her lips. "You're right, Liam," she said softly, her professional mask slipping for a moment. "That is the world I'm used to. And you're right to question it. It's not always what it's cracked up to be." The admission was unexpected, a rare glimpse into the fortress. The argument about the software was forgotten. In that moment, it wasn't about work anymore. It was about the two of them, two people from vastly different worlds, finding a small patch of common ground. Liam realized that Maya was right. There was a deep-seated sadness in Isabella, a loneliness that all her competence and poise couldn't hide. And he felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to be the person who could make her smile for real without the shadow of sadness in her eyes. It was a dangerous thought, one that blurred the lines between professional and personal, but he couldn't seem to shake it. The dynamic between them began to shift after that day, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The professional respect was still there, but it was now threaded with a new, more personal curiosity. They started talking about things other than workbooks, music, the merits of different kinds of coffee. Liam learned that Isabella had a dry, witty sense of humor that she kept carefully hidden beneath her professional demeanor. He learned that she could quote poetry by heart and had a surprisingly encyclopedic knowledge of old black and white films. In return, he told her about Maya, about the challenges and joys of single fatherhood, about his dreams of one day opening his own small, custom woodworking shop. He found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone in a long time. She was an easy listener, her quiet attention making him feel seen and heard. One rainy afternoon, they were the last two left in the office, the sound of rain drumming against the roof a steady, soothing rhythm. Liam was packing up to leave when Isabella spoke, her voice quiet. "Do you miss her?" she asked, her gaze fixed on a small framed photo of Maya on his desk. Liam knew she wasn't asking about Maya. He paused, his hand hovering over his lunchbox. He rarely talked about his late wife, not because the pain was still raw, but because the memories were sacred, and he didn't want them colored by other people's pity. But with Isabella, it felt different. "Every day," he said simply, his voice low. "She was the light. When she was gone, it felt like the world went gray." He didn't elaborate, didn't offer the details of the sudden illness, the hospital visits, the hollow-eyed grief. He didn't have to. Isabella just nodded, her eyes filled with a deep, quiet understanding that went beyond words. "Grief is a quiet house," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Full of rooms you can't enter anymore." The poetic observation was so unexpected, so poignant, that it caught him off guard. It was another glimpse behind the curtain, another piece of the puzzle, that was Isabella Vance. He realized she wasn't just a sharp businesswoman, she was a woman who understood loss, who understood the weight of a quiet house. "You've been there too," he stated, not as a question, but as a realization. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. A shadow passed over her face, and the wall he thought was coming down went right back up. "We should probably go," she said, her voice once again cool and professional. "It's getting late." She stood and gathered her things, the moment of connection broken as quickly as it had formed. Liam watched her go, a sense of frustration and intrigue warring within him. He had gotten closer than ever to understanding her, only to be pushed away. It was clear that Isabella had secrets, wounds, that she kept carefully guarded. And though he knew he should keep his distance, that blurring the lines was a dangerous game, he couldn't help but feel a pull toward her, a desire to know the woman behind the walls. He was beginning to care about her, not just as a colleague, but as a person. And that scared him more than any failing factory or looming layoff ever could. The following week, Isabella was different. The brief moment of vulnerability in the office seemed to have spooked her. She was more reserved, more professional, the walls around her rebuilt thicker than before. She avoided being alone with Liam, always ensuring a third person was present in their meetings, keeping their conversations strictly to business. Liam felt the shift, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He tried to tell himself it was for the best. A professional relationship was all it could ever be. They were from two different worlds. A fact he was reminded of every time she stepped out of the sleek black car that a driver dropped her off in each morning. But the memory of that shared moment of understanding lingered. He missed the easy camaraderie they had started to build. He missed her wry sense of humor and her quiet insights. He found himself watching her from across the room, trying to read the emotions she kept so carefully hidden. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She was carrying a weight, and for some reason, he wanted to help her carry it. The opportunity, when it came, was unexpected. The company was hosting a charity gala, a high-profile event to raise money for a local children's hospital. It was the kind of stuffy, formal affair Liam usually avoided like the plague, but this year, attendance for all department heads was mandatory. He dreaded it. He didn't own a suit, hadn't worn a tie in years, and the thought of making small talk with executives made his skin crawl. He was venting his frustration to one of the other foremen in the break room when Isabella walked in. She overheard the last of his complaint. "Not a fan of galas, Liam?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes held a familiar weariness. "Let's just say I'm more comfortable in steel-toed boots than dress shoes," he grumbled. She gave a small, sad smile. "I know the feeling." That evening he stood in front of his small closet staring at his limited options. He finally settled on his one decent pair of black slacks, a white button-down shirt that was slightly too tight in the shoulders, and a tie he'd borrowed from a neighbor. He looked in the mirror and felt like an imposter. When he arrived at the gala, held in a grand downtown hotel ballroom, his feeling of being out of place intensified. The room was a sea of tuxedos and shimmering gowns, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of clinking champagne glasses. He felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a purebred dog show. He spotted Isabella across the room. She was breathtaking. She wore a simple floor-length gown of deep emerald green that clung to her frame in all the right places. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and a string of delicate diamonds graced her neck. She was surrounded by a group of men in sharp suits, all vying for her attention. She smiled, she nodded, she laughed at their jokes, but Liam, watching from the fringes, could see the truth. Her eyes were empty. She was performing. She was the most beautiful, most lonely person in the room. He was about to retreat to a dark corner and count the minutes until he could leave when she looked up and her eyes found his across the crowded room. Her polite, practiced smile faltered for a second, replaced by a look of genuine, unadulterated relief. Excusing herself from the circle of admirers, she began to walk toward him, moving through the crowd with an effortless grace that made it seem like the sea of people was parting just for her. Liam's heart gave a lurch. He had no idea what she was going to say, but as she approached, a single, undeniable thought crossed his mind. He didn't care what world she came from. He was just glad she was walking toward his. As Isabella approached, a sense of calm settled over Liam, chasing away the social anxiety that had been plaguing him. She stopped in front of him, her emerald dress shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. "I was hoping I'd find you," she said, her voice a low, welcome anchor in the sea of noise. "Hiding in the corner, you mean?" he replied with a wry smile. She smiled back, a real smile this time, one that reached her tired eyes. "I was about to do the same. This isn't exactly my idea of a good time." "You look like you belong here," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. It was a genuine compliment, but it felt inadequate. She looked down at her dress, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. "This is a costume, Liam. Armor. It's part of the job." She looked back at him, her gaze intense. "You, on the other hand, look like yourself. And that's a rare thing in a room like this." Her words were a balm to his insecurity. She didn't see him as out of place, she saw him as authentic. "Would you, like to get some air?" he asked, feeling emboldened. "There's a terrace." "I would love that," she said, her relief palpable. They stepped out onto the wide stone terrace, the cool night air, a welcome relief from the stuffy ballroom. The city skyline glittered below them, a breathtaking panorama of lights and motion. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, leaning against the balustrade, two solitary figures against the vast, impersonal backdrop of the city. "Thank you for rescuing me," she said finally, her voice soft. "Felt more like you were rescuing me," he admitted. She turned to him, her expression serious. "Liam, I need to apologize for being distant this past week. I have a complicated history with letting people get close. When I feel like someone is starting to see past the armor, my first instinct is to retreat." Her confession was raw, vulnerable. It was the most she had ever revealed about herself, and Liam knew it had taken a tremendous amount of courage. "You don't have to explain anything to me, Isabella," he said gently. "But if you ever wanted to, I'm a good listener." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the soft light from the ballroom. "I know you are. That's what makes you so—" She trailed off, searching for the right word. "So dangerous?" he supplied, with a half-smile. She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even her. "Yes," she admitted. "Exactly." The air between them crackled with an unspoken energy. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume, see the delicate pulse at the base of her throat. He had the overwhelming urge to reach out, to brush a stray strand of hair from her face, to close the small distance between them. But he didn't. He knew that if he did, it would change everything, and he wasn't sure if either of them was ready for that. So he just stood there, beside her, in the quiet of the night, feeling a connection that was deeper and more real than anything he had felt in a very long time. It was a connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying, a quiet promise of something more, something that could either save them both or break them completely. The rest of the evening passed in a haze for Liam. They returned to the ballroom, but they didn't separate. They stayed together, a quiet island in the middle of the bustling room. Isabella introduced him to a few keyboard members and city officials, not as her subordinate, but simply as Liam, a colleague I deeply respect. The subtle shift in her language did not go unnoticed. People who had looked through him earlier now met his eye, offering firm handshakes and polite inquiries about his work. He handled it with a quiet confidence he didn't know he possessed, speaking plainly and honestly about the changes they were implementing at the plant. He realized he wasn't an imposter, he was just himself, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Later, as the evening was winding down, they found themselves on the dance floor. A slow, classic ballad was playing, and the floor was crowded with couples swaying to the music. "I'm not much of a dancer," Liam said, his hands in his pockets. "Neither am I," Isabella confessed. "But I'm tired of sitting on the sidelines." She held out her hand, a silent invitation. Liam's heart hammered in his chest. He took her hand, his rough, calloused palm enclosing her smooth, delicate one. He led her to the center of the floor and pulled her gently into his arms. He was clumsy at first, his steps stiff and uncertain, but Isabella didn't seem to mind. She rested her head lightly on his shoulder, her body relaxing against his. They moved together, slowly, to the rhythm of the music. It was a simple, chaste embrace, but it felt more intimate than any kiss. He could feel the warmth of her breath against his neck, the soft fabric of her dress beneath his fingertips. In that moment, the rest of the world faded away. There were no titles, no expectations, no two different worlds. There were just two people, holding on to each other, finding a moment of peace in the midst of the chaos. When the song ended, they didn't pull apart right away. They stood there for a beat longer, the silence between them charged with unspoken emotions. "I should go," Liam said finally, his voice hoarse. "Maya's sitter is waiting." Of course, Isabella replied, stepping back, though her eyes told him she didn't want him to leave. Her driver was waiting for her at the entrance, a sleek black town car that purred with quiet power. As Liam was heading toward the valet to get his own beat-up sedan, she called his name. "Liam, wait." She walked over to him, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. "Let me give you a ride." "You don't have to do that," he said, feeling a familiar pang of self-consciousness. "I know," she said, her gaze steady. "I want to." During the ride, they sat in the plush leather seats of the town car, a comfortable silence stretching between them. When they pulled up to his modest apartment building, he turned to thank her. "Isabella, about tonight." "Liam," she interrupted gently, "you don't have to say anything." And then, before he could process what was happening, she leaned in and pressed her lips against his. It was a soft, tentative kiss, full of all the things they hadn't said. It was a question and an answer, a risk and a promise. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough to shatter the remaining walls between them. He pulled away, his breath catching in his throat. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the powerful executive or the lonely heiress, but just a woman, vulnerable and real. "I'll see you on Monday?" she whispered, her eyes shining. "Monday," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. He got out of the car and watched as it pulled away, disappearing into the night. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the cold night air doing little to cool the fire that had been lit inside him. He had a feeling that his life and his heart would never be the same. The weekend was a strange suspended period of time for Liam. He went through his usual routine: pancakes with Maya on Saturday morning, a trip to the park, laundry on Sunday, but his mind was elsewhere. It was replaying the kiss, the dance, the conversation on the terrace. It was trying to make sense of the feelings that were churning inside him. He was falling for her. It was a terrifying, exhilarating realization. On the one hand, he hadn't felt this alive, this hopeful, since before his wife passed. Isabella saw him, truly saw him, in a way that no one else had. She challenged him, respected him, and made him feel like he was part of something bigger than himself. On the other hand, the chasm between their worlds was vast and undeniable. He was a blue-collar, single dad, living paycheck to paycheck. She was... well, he still didn't know exactly what she was, but he knew she was powerful, wealthy, and lived in a world he couldn't even imagine. What could he possibly offer a woman like her? The question gnawed at him, feeding his insecurities. He was so lost in his thoughts that he almost missed it. He was at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle, when he saw the magazine. It was a glossy business publication, tucked between a fitness magazine and a celebrity gossip rag. And on the cover, staring out with the same cool confidence she exuded in person, was Isabella Vance. The headline was stark and bold. "The Phantom of Sterling. Isabella Vance, the reclusive billionaire heiress, shakes up her father's ailing empire. Billionaire heiress." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. He snatched the magazine from the rack, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. There was a multi-page spread, complete with photos of Isabella at various corporate events, standing beside titans of industry, shaking hands with politicians. The article detailed her family's vast fortune, built on a global network of manufacturing and tech companies, with Sterling Industries being just one small, struggling piece of the puzzle. It described her as a brilliant but intensely private figure who had taken over the family business after her father's recent retirement due to illness. It mentioned her reputation as a ruthless but fair negotiator, a ghost in the machine who preferred to work behind the scenes. It was all there, in black and white. The secrets, the power, the immense wealth. The reason she drove a chauffeured car, wore designer clothes, and spoke with such effortless authority. She wasn't a consultant. She wasn't just an interested party. She was the new owner. She was his boss. Not just his boss, but the ultimate authority, the one who held the fate of the entire plant, his fate, in her hands. A cold wave of something that felt like betrayal washed over him. She had lied to him. Not directly, not with words, but with omissions. She had let him believe she was a partner, a colleague, when in reality she was the queen and he was just a pawn on her chessboard. The kiss, the dance, the vulnerable confessions, it all felt tainted now, like part of some elaborate game he didn't understand. Had she been studying him, like one of her assets? Was he just a project to her, the hard-working single dad she could save to prove she had a heart? The thought was nauseating. He paid for the magazine and his groceries in a daze, the cashier's cheerful greeting barely registering. He drove home, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, anger, and a deep, aching disappointment. He had let his guard down. He had started to trust her, to care for her. And it had all been based on a lie. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew one thing for certain. Monday was going to be a reckoning. Liam didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his living room, the magazine open on the coffee table, Isabella's face staring up at him like a beautiful, silent accusation. Every interaction they'd had replayed in his mind, now cast in a new harsh light. Her careful questions, her quiet observations, her investment in him, it all felt manipulative now, a calculated strategy from a billionaire playing a role. The anger was a hot, bitter thing in his throat. He felt like a fool. He had poured out his heart to this woman, told her about his wife, his struggles, his dreams. And all the while, she was his boss, the anonymous owner pulling the strings. By the time the sun rose, casting a pale, gray light through the window, his anger had cooled into a hard, cold resolve. He knew what he had to do. He arrived at the plant early, before the first shift had even started. The building was quiet, the air still and cold. He went straight to her office, the one that had previously been the plant manager's, a corner office with large windows overlooking the factory floor. He didn't knock. He walked in to find her already there, sitting at the large mahogany desk, a cup of coffee in her hand, her expression serene as she looked over some paperwork. She looked up when he entered, a warm smile gracing her lips. "Liam, you're here early." Her smile faded when she saw the look on his face, the magazine clutched in his hand. He tossed it onto the desk in front of her. It landed with a soft thud. "Billionaire heiress," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You left that part out." Isabella's face went pale. The composure she wore like armor crumbled, revealing the raw vulnerability he'd only glimpsed before. She looked from the magazine back to him, her eyes wide with a pain that was so genuine it almost broke through his anger. "Liam, I can explain." She started, her voice a near whisper. "Can you?" He shot back, the anger flaring again. "Can you explain why you lied to me? Why you let me believe you were just a consultant, a colleague? Was this all some kind of game to you, a social experiment to see how the other half lives?" "No," she said, shaking her head, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "It was never like that. I didn't tell you because the moment people know who I am, they change. They stop seeing me and start seeing the money, the power. They either want something from me or they resent me for what I have. I was tired of it. With you, for the first time, I felt like someone saw me." "And what did you see?" he countered, stepping closer to the desk, his voice low and intense. "Did you see a charity case? A fixer-upper project? The noble, struggling single dad you could swoop in and save?" "I saw a good man," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I saw a man with more integrity in his little finger than any of the executives I've known my whole life. I saw someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, who loved his daughter more than anything in the world. I saw someone I respected, someone I cared about." Her words were a torrent of desperate honesty, but Liam was too hurt, too raw, to hear them. The betrayal had dug too deep. "I can't work for you, Isabella," he said, his voice hard as steel. "I can't be your project. You're not my project," she cried, standing up, her hands pressed against the desk. "You're my partner." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I was your employee, and I quit." He turned and walked out of the office, not looking back. He could hear her call his name, her voice breaking on a sob, but he didn't stop. He walked through the silent factory, past the machines he knew so well, past the faces of the men he had worked alongside for years. He walked out the gate and didn't look back, the weight of his own stubborn pride, a cold, heavy burden in his chest. He had just walked away from the best opportunity of his life, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had also just walked away from the one person who had made him feel whole again. The days that followed were a blur of gray, hollow emptiness. Liam fell back into the familiar, desperate rhythm of unemployment. He spent his hours scanning job boards, sending out resumes, and making calls that went unanswered. The hope that had blossomed inside him just a week ago had withered and died, leaving behind a bitter, aching void. He was short with Maya, his patience worn thin by stress and a profound, unnamed grief. He saw the confusion and hurt in her eyes, and it only added to the self-loathing that was eating him from the inside out. He had told himself he'd quit on principle, that he was protecting his dignity. But as the rent due date loomed closer and the food in the cupboards dwindled, his pride felt less like a shield and more like a cage. He missed the plant. He missed the work, the challenge, the sense of purpose. He missed the camaraderie with the other workers. And God, he missed her. He missed her quiet strength, her sharp mind, her unexpected vulnerability. He missed the way she looked at him, like he was someone who mattered. He had thrown it all away because he was scared. Scared of being hurt, scared of being a fool, scared of a world he didn't understand. One evening, about a week after he'd quit, he was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of unpaid bills, when Maya came and sat beside him. She didn't say anything for a long time, just colored quietly in her coloring book. Then, without looking up, she said, "I miss Isabella." The simple, honest statement was like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. "Yeah, sweetie," he said, his voice thick. "Me too." "Why did you leave?" she asked, finally looking up at him, her eyes wide and searching. "Is it because she's rich?" He was taken aback by her directness. "It's complicated," he stammered. "Being rich doesn't make you a bad person, Daddy," she said, with the simple, profound wisdom of a child. "Mommy always said you should look at what people do, not what they have." Her words, a faint echo of his late wife's own philosophy, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at the drawing Maya was coloring. It was a picture of the three of them, him, her, and Isabella standing in front of the factory, all holding hands and smiling. In Isabella's hand was a giant wrench. He had been so focused on what Isabella had that he had completely ignored what she did. She had saved his job, she had believed in him, she had shown him kindness and respect. She had tried to be honest with him, in her own guarded way. And he had thrown it all back in her face. The realization was a painful, humbling one. His pride hadn't been protecting him, it had been blinding him. He had been so afraid of being a pawn that he had failed to see he was being offered the chance to be a king. He looked at his daughter, at her hopeful, trusting face, and knew what he had to do. It was time to swallow his pride. It was time to go back. It was time to fight for the future he had been too scared to claim. The drive back to Sterling Industries was the longest of Liam's life. Every mile was a battle against the nagging voice of doubt in his head. What if she wouldn't see him? What if she had already replaced him? What if he had shattered whatever fragile trust they had built beyond repair? He parked his car in the visitor's lot, his hands clammy on the steering wheel. Taking a deep breath, he walked into the gleaming lobby, a place that now felt both foreign and strangely like home. He didn't have an appointment, and he fully expected the receptionist to turn him away. But when he gave his name, her eyes widened in recognition. "Of course, Mr. Liam," she said, her voice filled with a newfound respect. "Miss Vance is expecting you." Expecting him? How could she be? He rode the elevator up to the executive floor, his heart pounding in his chest. The doors opened onto a hushed, carpeted hallway lined with modern art. Her office was at the end, the door slightly ajar. He knocked softly. "Come in," her voice called, and the sound of it, so familiar and yet so distant, made his breath catch. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. She was standing by the large window, looking out over the sprawling factory below. She turned when he entered, and the look on her face was not one of anger or triumph, but of a deep, weary sadness. "Liam," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw the magazine," he started, his own voice hoarse. "I was angry. I felt like a fool." "You weren't a fool," she said, taking a step toward him. "You were hurt, and you had every right to be. I should have told you. I was a coward." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I was the coward. I was so afraid of being hurt, so afraid of what I didn't understand, that I pushed you away. I pushed away the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. He took another step, closing the distance between them. "Maya said something to me," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She said you should look at what people do, not what they have. And you believed in me. You gave me a chance. You treated me with respect. That's what you did." And I was too proud and too stubborn to see it. He reached out and took her hands, his rough palms enveloping hers. "I don't care about the money, Isabella. I don't care that you're my boss. I care about you. And I was wrong to walk away." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. But for the first time, they were not tears of sadness or loneliness. They were tears of relief, of a deep, profound joy. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered. "I've been hoping you'd come back." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm. And then he pulled her into his arms, and the kiss that followed was not tentative or questioning. It was a kiss of certainty, of forgiveness, of two broken people finding their way back to each other, a kiss that sealed a promise to build something real, something that would last, together. The months that followed were a testament to that promise. Liam returned to the plant not just as an employee, but as a true partner. Working side by side, he and Isabella began the arduous process of transforming Sterling Industries. Liam's practical, on-the-ground knowledge, combined with Isabella's sharp business acumen and willingness to invest, proved to be a formidable combination. They replaced outdated machinery, streamlined workflows, and, most importantly, fostered a new culture of respect and collaboration. The plant began to thrive, not just financially, but in its spirit. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of pride and ownership among the workers. Liam and Isabella's relationship blossomed in tandem with the revitalization of the plant. They were a study in contrasts, the billionaire heiress and the blue-collar foreman, but their differences complemented each other perfectly. He grounded her, reminding her of the simple, honest things that truly mattered. She challenged him, pushing him to see his own potential, to believe in a future bigger than he had ever dared to imagine. Their love story was an unconventional one, forged not in ballrooms or fancy restaurants, but in the noisy, gritty reality of the factory floor. It was built on shared lunches in the cafeteria, late-night brainstorming sessions over blueprints, and the quiet, easy comfort of knowing they were a team. Maya was the heart of their new, blended world. She adored Isabella, who was no longer the sad lady, but a warm, loving presence in her life. Isabella taught her how to bake, read her bedtime stories, and attended every school event, cheering louder than anyone else. She wasn't trying to replace Maya's mother, she was simply loving her, creating a new family built not on blood, but on a deep, unwavering bond of affection. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year to the day after Liam had been fired, the three of them stood on a newly constructed observation deck overlooking the bustling factory floor. The plant was humming with a new energy, a symphony of progress and productivity. Liam had his arm around Isabella, and Maya was perched on his shoulders, her laughter echoing in the vast space. "It's amazing what you've done," Isabella said, her head resting on his shoulder. "What we've done," he corrected, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. He looked out at the world they had built together, a world where a failing factory could be reborn, where a struggling single dad could find his purpose, and where a lonely billionaire could find a home. He thought about the man he had been a year ago, full of fear and pride, and the woman she had been, hidden behind walls of wealth and loneliness. They had come so far. "You know," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I was fired in front of everyone, right here in this plant." Maya giggled. "But then, the new owner, who was a secret billionaire, rehired you." Isabella laughed, her eyes shining with love and amusement. "Best business decision I ever made," she said. And as he looked at her, at the incredible woman who had seen his worth when he couldn't see it himself, and at his daughter, who was the light of his life, Liam knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that getting fired had been the best thing that had ever happened to him. It had led him here, to this moment, to this love, to this life that was more real and more beautiful than anything he could have ever imagined. He had found his home, not in a place, but in a person. And together, they were building a legacy that would last a lifetime. The air in the newly christened Vance Liam Innovation Center, a state-of-the-art training facility built on what used to be an abandoned section of the Sterling plant, was filled with the buzz of excitement and the smell of fresh paint. Community leaders, employees, and local press had gathered for the dedication ceremony. At the podium, Liam stood, no longer in a borrowed tie but in a well-tailored suit that Isabella had insisted on, looking every bit the confident, respected leader he had become. He spoke not of profit margins or efficiency metrics, but of people. He spoke of second chances, of the dignity of work, and of building a community, not just a company. As he spoke, his eyes found Isabella in the front row. She wasn't looking at him with the pride of an owner for a successful investment. She was looking at him with the deep, quiet love of a wife for her husband. Maya sat between them, a little older now, beaming with a pride that outshone everyone in the room. Later that evening, long after the crowds had gone, the three of them walked through the quiet, empty facility. The moonlight streamed through the large glass windows, illuminating the new machinery and the freshly painted walls. Maya ran ahead, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Liam and Isabella followed, their hands intertwined. "A year ago, I was ready to liquidate this place," Isabella said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I saw it as just another failing asset on a balance sheet." "And now?" Liam asked, squeezing her hand. "Now," she said, stopping to look up at him, her face illuminated by the moonlight, "I see it as the place where I found my life, where I found you." He pulled her close, and they stood there, in the heart of the factory they had rebuilt together, a testament to their improbable love story. It was a story that proved that sometimes the most profound changes don't come from grand gestures or calculated plans, but from a simple act of truly seeing the worth in another person. The factory was no longer just a place of work. It was the cradle of their family, the symbol of their shared future. A future built on a foundation of trust, respect, and a love that was as strong and enduring as the steel they shaped every day. Their story had become a quiet legend in the town, a modern fairy tale whispered over coffee and in grocery store aisles. The tale of the single dad, fired and humiliated, only to be rescued and loved by the secret billionaire who owned it all. But Liam and Isabella knew the truth was simpler and far more profound. She hadn't rescued him. He hadn't saved her. They had simply met in the middle of their brokenness and, together, had built something whole. And in the quiet hum of the factory, under the soft glow of the moon, they knew their greatest creation wasn't a product or a profit, but the beautiful, resilient, and extraordinary life they had built together.